This is the process that I use when I spray baste my quilts, where I'm layering the backing, the batting, and then the top pieced quilt portion of my quilt. So you can kind of see how I go through it so that all three layers are spray basted together.
Okay, I am going to start marking my quilting lines, and I'm going to do that using some painter's tape and my ruler. And so I have the quilt here, And I'm going to do straight lines using my walking foot, and I am going to do them at a 45-degree angle. So diagonally across the quilt in one direction and then diagonally in another direction. So to do that, to establish my first line and get it going the direction I want, I take my ruler and I'm going to just pick a spot on the quilt, and here is the 45-degree line, and I'm just lining that up with a seam line on the quilt. And then I'm going to mark with a piece of tape right next to that. And then I'm going to stitch on, I'm just going to pick a side of the tape and then stitch right next to the edge of the tape. And that will be my first line. And so I'll just mark this by just moving the quilt and then move the ruler and then just keep adding the tape all the way down this line. Okay, I have my walking foot on and we're ready to go ahead and start sewing. I am just going to use the edge of my foot and follow along the edge of the tape. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull up my threads. I like to have my bobbin thread to the top and hang on to it before I start, and that kind of helps eliminate a bird's nest or whatever, and then I know that all my threads are on the top, so it's not going to get tangled up in another line of quilting underneath. And I'm starting off of the quilt and kind of locking my stitches, you know, into the batting and backing, and then I'll trim all that off with the threads and everything when we're all done quilting. So I'm just going to go right next to that edge of the tape. And just take your time. Gonna kind of check it here and make sure the stitch length looks good. Okay. And I'm just kind of advancing the quilt as I go and keeping my excess kind of rolled up over here. Okay, I've got the first line stitched, and for line number 2, I have added this adjustable guide bar to the back side of my walking foot, and I have set the measurement to be about 3 inches from the line to the center of my needle. So when I follow, I am going to have this guide ride right along that stitching line, and then this next line should be 3 inches apart. And there's no rhyme or reason, I just picked 3 inches. I don't want them too close together because I am going to come back and do another line right next to it to kind of like echo it. So I want to give myself plenty of room to do that. And also, I don't want it real tight because I don't want to quilt this forever. So I would like to, you know, have it done you know, within a few days. So, okay, pulling up my top thread, or my bobbin thread to the top, I should say, and I'm starting before my quilt top, so I'm into the backing and the batting here, and I'm just doing a few stitches there, and then I am just keeping an eye on this guide bar over here, that it's following that line of stitching. And the tape is just there, I haven't taken it off, but I will reuse that when I go do the next direction. And then once it's kind of in my way, then I'll take it off. But it's fine just being there now. And then I'm just going to, take my time, go through here, keeping my guide bar on that row of stitching, and just keep stitching. Okay, we have all of our lines quilted in both directions. And at this point, it looks pretty good. We could call it done, but let's go ahead and keep going and add some more lines to it to make it look even better. So what I'm going to do now is with my walking foot, if you can see, there is a line right there, and that is 1/4 inch away from the center of the needle. So if I use that line on my presser foot and I follow it right along my stitch line, then my next line of stitching is going to be 1/4 inch away from that. So I'm going to do that on the side, this side of each of the lines all the way through. Now when I get to where I have to switch the quilt and turn it around so that I don't have all the bulk, in the arm of my machine here, what I will do is take this little sticker with an arrow on it, and I'm going to position it so that whenever I come to the line, I'll know which side I'm supposed to stitch on. So I'm supposed to stitch, on this side here. And that way, all of my lines when I'm done quilting are the same distance apart. The center square here is going to be the same size. If I quilted on one side here, but on the other side here, then it would not be totally equidistant, all that kind of stuff. So that just kind of helps me know which side of the line I'm going to quilt on. And then I know that it's all good. So I'm going to take that off, and we'll go ahead and stitch one line here. Okay. And again, I'm just following that line along that okay, and when I come to the end, I can remove that, and then you can see I've got two lines and they're 1/4 inch apart. So I'm just going to continue that all the way throughout the rest of the quilt, and we'll see you back here when that's done. Okay, I've got everything stitched twice in one direction, and now I'm going back on the last row of stitching, the second row of stitching in the other direction. So I'm about 75% of the way done. That's good. This here shows kind of how I manage the bulk of the quilt. I do have it clipped up on this rack. It's just like a clothing, a rack that you could hang clothes on, I guess. And I just have some bungee cords with some clamps on it, and then it just holds up and it can kind of slide like a shower curtain along there. It also just kind of goes up on the table there, so all the weight then has been supported. I'm not fighting it here at my needle while I'm sewing, trying to get everything quilted. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep working on it. Okay, I'm at the point where I'm like halfway through, and so the largest majority of the bulk is going to be on this side, and I just kind of want to show you how I manage that going through. This throat space here is, I think, 9 or 10 inches, so just kind of my process of dealing with it. I kind of have it pooled in my lap, kind of an accordion fold. I do have it rolled up a little bit because the very corner where all the backing kind of hangs over, I have stitched that into the back side of a quilt, like it's been folded under it because it's hard to tell where it's at. So after doing that about 4 times, I learned to kind of roll that part up a little bit so I know where that's at. I can see it on the top of my quilt, so then I'm not worried about anything getting caught underneath. So I just kind of, again, it's just kind of pooled over here, it's hanging over here, and we'll just keep sewing. And what I'm really focused on is the area about 6 inches in front of my presser foot where my hands are. That's the area that I'm stitching. That's what I need to be concerned with. This other stuff all around, you know, just keep it out of the way. I know that this is the area right here that I'm making sure is flat. It can move freely through. And I go until, you know, it's kind of past my hands where my hands are no longer in front helping guide it. And that's when I can stop and readjust. Okay, and then I'm just going to I kind of roll it, kind of squish it, just get it, you know, out of the way. Okay, that's it. And then I just pull it back through and I can stitch the next line. I'll probably do a few more lines and then I will go ahead and flip it and come back the other way. That way then the bulk of my quilt will be hanging up here and not so much in here. So that's all there is to it. Easy peasy, right? All right. Okay, I've gotten to where I've done as far as I can this way, and now I'm going to flip it. So I did put my little piece of tape on here with my arrow telling me, hey, the next row has to go on this side of that line. And again, that just keeps the unstitched squares the same size throughout the whole quilt. And does it really matter? No, but as long as I'm doing it, I'm going to try. If I get it on the wrong side, it's not that big of a deal, but I will make an effort to keep it going the same direction. So, okay, so I'm unhooking it from my clamps, and then I'm just gonna give it a little spin. And, oh yeah, that's gonna be so much better. This is not as much over here. So then here, I kind of just unfold it and give myself a little bit of slack here, and then I'm gonna just clamp one part there and then come over here, and I'm gonna clamp it about right here, and I'll adjust it as I'm going, but that just gives me a nice starting point. Okay, and then I know I've got a stitch on this side of the line, so make some adjustments here. Okay, and then I'm gonna find that corner that I was talking about where this is my batting and my backing that's hanging off, and I don't want this to get flipped under. It's very easy for that to happen. So this part I do try to like roll it up. So I want to know where that's at because that's always my problem area. So other than that, it's just kind of bunched up. I've got it bunched up on my lap, and then we're ready to go ahead, and I'm going to remove this now. And I know which side I'm on here. And we're going to go ahead and just keep on quilting. Oh, and I changed my bobbin, so it's telling me I didn't shut the door. So okay, and it is easier with my gloves, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab them, put them back on. And I think I need a little bit more slack there, so I'm just going to adjust that. There we go. I could tell because it was kind of pulling a little bit, and I don't want any kind of pulling or tugging or anything. I just want it to freely stitch through. So. Okay, I am now adding my binding, and you can see the awesome texture of the quilting on the back. Those lines make a really cool design. I'm pleased with how that turned out. So I'm adding the binding, and I have chosen this little black and white stripe that's also used in my diamond squares on the front of the quilt, so it kind of carries the theme throughout. And I cut my binding strips 2.5 inches, and I've got a little surprise coming up here, so I'm just going to keep adding this on. I like to sew mine to the back, wrap it to the front, and then stitch it down with a neat top stitch on the front side. So I am adding it to the back. And when I add it, I have a little bit, like less than 1/8 of an inch of my quilt peeking out. And then I'm putting the binding, my foot is 1/4 inch away from the edge of the binding. So that way I know that all of my quilt is actually going to be inside the binding. Okay, so when I was making the binding and going through the leftover scraps, I did have a few little strip sets left that I had from the border on the front of the quilt. And so what I decided to do was add that as just a little pop of detail into the binding on the quilt. So I think it's gonna be really neat. One thing I did, I just, when I added these strips on, I went ahead and just did a straight seam to join them. I did not, like do the diagonal seams on all the rest of the strips that I've added. I did do it that way because it decreases the bulk in the binding, but because these are done straight, I wanted the look of it to just be straight. So that's how I've added these. However, that does mean that there's a ton of seams in here, and I could have pressed them open. I didn't. I just left it the way they were pressed on my little strip set. So I just added that in there, and then I'll just go a little bit slower when I stitch this on, but I think it's going to just add a neat little pop of detail when that shows up on the end of the quilt. So just gonna sew like normal. And then I use just the low pile minky, but if you have a decorative minky or one that has more depth to it, then I would cut my binding strips just a little bit wider. That way it gives you a little bit more to float around that, you know, because with the batting in there and the minky, it does get to be a little bit thicker. But since this one was kind of thin, I just did the 2.5 inches. Okay, so now I'm coming up on this and I'm just gonna sew right through it. And it is a bit thicker. I can tell the machine that it's thicker when the machine's going through it. But that's going to be kind of fun just to have in there. All right, and then I'm just going to keep sewing on the rest of the binding. I do have another little pop of it in here. I think I put it between the 3rd strip and the 5th strip when I was joining those is where I added that. So I think it's gonna hopefully, you know, not hit on a corner. If it does come where it's gonna be on the corner where I have to do the miter, I think I'll cut my binding off, move the strip set, and then continue sewing with it. That'll just make it easier. So we'll see what it looks like here in a little bit when it's all done.